Daniel had always been the kind of guy who liked to win. Not in the loud, boastful way, more like the quiet, smug kind where he'd sit back and let everyone else realize, a little too late, that he'd already come out on top. He wasn't cruel, not exactly. But he had a habit of keeping score, especially when it came to people who'd wronged him. And in his mind, no one had wronged him quite like his ex-wife. They'd been married for 6 years. 6 years of dinners, vacations, inside jokes, and slow Sunday mornings. But somewhere in the middle of it all, a crack had formed, one neither of them noticed until it split wide open. The issue? Children. Or rather, the lack of them. From the very beginning, she'd been honest. "I don't think I want kids," she told him on their third date over coffee that had gone cold. He'd laughed it off. "Yeah, sure," he'd said, thinking it was just something people said before they changed their minds. Back then, he figured love would fix everything, even biology, even timing, even deeply held beliefs. He believed that if he loved her enough, she'd eventually see things his way, but she never did. Not because she didn't love him. In fact, she loved him fiercely, enough to tell him the truth again and again, even when it hurt. "This isn't about you," she'd said one night, her voice steady but her hands trembling. "It's about who I am. I can't pretend to want something I don't. And if you need that, then maybe we're not right for each other," he'd argued. He'd pleaded. He'd even tried guilt, mentioning his mother's longing for grandchildren, his friends' growing families, the empty nursery he'd already pictured in his head. But she stayed firm, and eventually, the distance between them grew too wide to cross. They divorced quietly, without drama, without blame, at least on her part. But Daniel? He carried it like a stone in his chest. For a while, he told himself he was better off. He dated, traveled, got promoted. He even told friends with a shrug that he'd dodged a bullet. Imagine being tied down to someone who couldn't give him what he truly wanted. But deep down, there was a quiet ache, a sense that he'd been denied something fundamental. And worse, he felt foolish for having believed her when she said she'd never change. Then came Maya. She was warm, grounded, and, most importantly, wanted a family just as much as he did. They met at a mutual friend's wedding, and within a year they were engaged. When she told him she was pregnant, he cried in the parking lot of the pharmacy, clutching the test like a trophy. This was it, the life he'd always imagined, the validation he'd been waiting for. Now at 38, Daniel was planning his baby shower. Not just any baby shower, this was going to be perfect. Soft lighting, organic cotton onesies, a custom cake shaped like a stork, and a guest list full of people who'd watched his journey. Maya's family adored him. His co-workers thought he was finally settled. Even his old college buddies sent texts saying, "About time you got your happy ending." But one name kept popping into his head as he scrolled through his contacts. Her. He hadn't spoken to her in over 2 years. Not since the final paperwork was signed. He'd heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to a quieter part of town, started her own photography business, traveled solo to Iceland. She seemed content, too content maybe, and that bothered him more than he cared to admit. One evening, after Maya had gone to bed, Daniel sat at his laptop, a glass of whiskey in hand. He opened his email and typed her address from memory. He didn't have to think hard about what to write. The words came easily, wrapped in the thin veil of politeness. "Hey, hope you're doing well. Maya and I are having a baby shower next Saturday at her place. Thought you might want to come. After all, you were part of my life for a long time. Plus, I think you'd enjoy seeing what real joy looks like these days." He read it twice. It sounded casual enough, friendly even, but beneath the surface it was a jab, a quiet, calculated reminder. You walked away from this, and now I have it without you. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. He told Maya about it the next morning over breakfast. "I invited my ex," he said, buttering toast like it was no big deal. Maya paused, her spoon hovering over her yogurt. "Your ex, the one who didn't want kids?" "Yeah," he said, shrugging. "It's been years. I figured it was time to bury the hatchet. Show her I've moved on." Maya didn't look convinced. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "What if it's awkward?" "She'll probably say no," he replied, though he secretly hoped she wouldn't. "And if she does come?" "Well, it'll be fine. She's not the type to cause a scene." What he didn't say, what he couldn't admit even to himself, was that part of him wanted her to see it, to see the balloons, the tiny shoes, the way people fawned over Maya's growing belly. He wanted her to feel that pang of regret, that quiet what-if that he'd carried for so long. Maybe then the score would finally feel even. Meanwhile, across town, she read the email and sat very still. She recognized the tone immediately, not kindness, but challenge. She knew Daniel well enough to hear the unspoken words between the lines. For a moment, anger flared. How dare he? After everything, after the pain they'd both gone through, he was using his baby shower like a stage to prove a point? But then she took a deep breath. She wasn't the same woman who'd left that marriage. She'd done a lot of healing since then. Therapy, long hikes, late-night journaling. She'd even forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because she refused to let bitterness take up space in her life anymore. Still, she couldn't deny the curiosity. She hadn't seen him in years, and part of her wondered, was he happy? Truly? Or was this just another performance? She looked around her small, sunlit apartment. On the wall hung photos she'd taken. Mountains, city streets, strangers laughing in cafes. Her life was full, just not in the way people expected. She'd built something quiet and meaningful, on her own terms. And then 3 months ago, everything had changed. She'd met someone, a kind, patient man who listened more than he spoke, who loved books and cooking and didn't care that she'd once said she never wanted children. With him, she'd felt safe enough to reconsider. Not because she'd changed her mind overnight, but because she realized that maybe, just maybe, her heart had more room than she'd thought. They'd tried IVF, and against all odds, against statistics, logic, and every doctor's warning, she'd gotten pregnant. Not with one, not with two, but with 4 quadruplets. The news had stunned her, terrified her, and then slowly filled her with a strange, overwhelming awe. She wasn't doing it for anyone else. Not to prove a point, not to fill a void. She was doing it because for the first time she wanted to. Now, as she stared at Daniel's email, an idea began to form, not out of spite, but out of something deeper. A quiet defiance, a refusal to be shamed for the life she'd chosen, whether that life included children or not. She typed a short reply. Thanks for the invite. I'll be there. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She just showed up in his inbox like a ghost from a past he thought he'd buried. Daniel read her reply and felt a flicker of unease, but it was quickly drowned out by satisfaction. She was coming. Perfect. He told Maya that night, trying to sound casual. She said yes. Maya frowned. Are you sure this is what you want? It's fine, he said, already imagining the moment she walked in. Alone. Maybe a little uncomfortable. Watching everyone celebrate the family she'd walked away from. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that she wouldn't be alone and she wouldn't be uncomfortable. She'd be wheeling in 4 tiny lives, each one a quiet rebuttal to every assumption he'd ever made about her. But that was still a week away. For now, Daniel focused on the details of the shower, ordering the cake, picking out the playlist, arranging the gift table just so. He wanted everything to be perfect. Not just for Maya, but for the audience he'd invited, especially one. He didn't realize it yet, but he wasn't setting a trap. He was walking into one of his own making, and the real story, the one about humility, grace, and the unpredictable shape of joy, was just beginning. The morning of the baby shower dawned bright and warm, the kind of late spring day that made everything feel possible. Balloons in soft yellows and blues bobbed gently against the fence in the backyard. A long table held neatly folded onesies, tiny socks rolled into pairs, and a cake shaped like a smiling elephant. Guests began to arrive. Cousins, co-workers, old college friends, each carrying wrapped gifts and cheerful hellos. Laughter floated through the air, mingling with the soft strum of acoustic guitar music playing from a speaker. Maya sat in a cushioned chair under a string of fairy lights, one hand resting on her rounded belly, the other holding a glass of sparkling water with a slice of lemon. She looked happy, relaxed, glowing in that way expectant mothers sometimes do. But every so often her eyes flicked toward the driveway, scanning for a car that didn't belong. She hadn't said much after Daniel told her his ex was coming, but the tension had been there, quiet like a hum beneath the surface. She trusted Daniel mostly, but she also knew how deeply he'd been hurt and how pride could twist even the best intentions. Around noon, the backyard was full. Children ran barefoot on the grass, adults chatted over finger sandwiches, and someone had started a game of guess the baby food flavor that had everyone laughing. Daniel moved through the crowd with ease, refilling drinks, accepting hugs, posing for photos with Maya. He felt good, in control, like he was finally standing in the life he was meant to have. Then the gate creaked open. A hush didn't fall all at once. It rippled. First one guest turned, then another. A woman holding a plate of cupcakes froze mid-bite. Someone whispered, "Is that her?" Daniel turned and his breath caught. She stood at the entrance, not in a dramatic pose, not with anger or flair, but calm, composed, and utterly unexpected. She wore a simple linen dress, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, but what stole everyone's attention wasn't her. It was what she was pushing, a double stroller. Not the usual kind with 2 seats. This one was custom-built, wide and sturdy, with 4 matching infant carriers strapped securely in place. Each carrier held a tiny baby, swaddled in soft gray blankets, their faces peaceful in sleep. One had a pacifier gently bobbing with each breath. Another had a tiny fist curled near her cheek. They looked like little peas in a pod, same button nose, same wisps of dark hair, same quiet rhythm of newborn life. The backyard fell silent. Even the kids stopped running. Daniel stood frozen, his smile stuck on his face like a mask that no longer fit. His mind scrambled for an explanation. Had she borrowed them? Was this some kind of joke? But no. She moved with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Adjusting a strap, checking a blanket, gently rocking the stroller to keep the babies calm. She walked forward slowly, not making a show of it, but impossible to ignore. People instinctively parted to let her through, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. A few murmured greetings. She nodded politely, her expression unreadable. When she reached the center of the yard, she stopped and looked directly at Daniel. "Hi," she said, her voice quiet but clear. He couldn't speak. His throat felt tight. Maya stood up slowly, one hand still on her belly, the other gripping the back of her chair. She looked from Daniel to the woman, then down at the 4 sleeping infants. Her expression wasn't angry, just stunned, searching. "I wasn't sure if I should come," the woman continued, glancing around. "But I got your message. And I thought, why not?" She reached into a large tote bag slung over her shoulder and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped box. "This is for you," she said, handing it to Maya. "It's nothing fancy. Just something I made." Maya took it carefully, still speechless. Then, as if on cue, one of the babies stirred. A soft whimper turned into a fussy cry, then another joined in. Within seconds, all 4 were awake, blinking in the sunlight, their tiny voices rising in a chorus of hunger and confusion. The woman didn't panic. She simply unstrapped the first carrier, lifted the baby gently into her arms, and began to rock her. "Shh, it's okay, sweetheart," she murmured. "We're just visiting." She reached for a bottle from a cooler bag attached to the stroller, tested the temperature on her wrist, and offered it to the baby, who latched on immediately. The other 3 continued to fuss, but less urgently now, comforted by the sound of their sister feeding. Someone finally broke the silence. "Are those yours?" She nodded. "All 4. Born 10 weeks ago, girls." A ripple of awe moved through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Quadruplets?" Another said, "I didn't even know that was possible." She smiled faintly. "Neither did I until it happened." Daniel finally found his voice, though it came out hoarse. You have kids?" She looked at him, not with triumph, but with something softer, almost pity. "Life has a funny way of surprising you," she said. "I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. Turns out my heart had other plans." She didn't say it to hurt him. There was no edge in her voice, no gloating. Just honesty, but it landed like a punch anyway, because in that moment, Daniel saw everything he'd gotten wrong. He'd invited her here to make her feel small, to show her the life she'd missed out on. But instead, she'd shown up with a life so full, so unexpectedly abundant, that it made his little performance feel petty. She hadn't come to compete. She'd come as herself, changed, yes, but not because she'd been wrong before. She'd simply grown. Maya stepped forward then, her initial shock giving way to curiosity and something like admiration. "Can I hold one?" she asked softly. The woman hesitated for just a second, then nodded. "Her name's Lila," she said, carefully transferring the now drowsy baby into Maya's arms. "She's the calmest of the four." Maya cradled the tiny girl like she was made of glass, her eyes filling with tears. "She's so light," she whispered. "So perfect." The woman watched her, then glanced at Daniel. "I'm not here to make things awkward," she said quietly. "I just wanted you to know. I'm happy, really happy, and I hope you are too." Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to say something clever, something that would reclaim the moment. But all he could manage was, "I didn't know." "I know," she said. "Nobody did. I kept it quiet at first. 4 babies. It's a lot to process." A guest finally broke the tension by stepping forward with a folding chair. "Here, you must be exhausted. Please sit." She accepted it gratefully, settling the stroller close and keeping one hand on the handle. The other babies had quieted now, watching the world with wide, curious eyes. Someone brought her a glass of water. Another offered a plate of food. The party slowly resumed, but differently now. The mood had shifted from celebration to something deeper. Wonder, humility, even a kind of shared awe at how life unfolds in ways no one can predict. Daniel stood off to the side, watching as Maya gently rocked Lila, talking softly to her unborn child as if already introducing them. He felt like a ghost in his own party, present but no longer the center of it. And maybe that was okay, because the real story wasn't about him proving a point. It was about a woman who'd been labeled child-free, walking into a room full of assumptions, and quietly rewriting the narrative with 4 tiny breaths, 4 beating hearts and a grace that left everyone speechless. As the afternoon wore on, people stopped staring and started helping. Someone fetched extra diapers from the woman's car. Another offered to push the stroller while she ate. A teenage niece, wide-eyed, asked if she could hold one of the babies just for a minute. The woman said yes, and in that moment, surrounded by strangers who were suddenly kind, holding her daughter while the sun dipped lower in the sky, she didn't feel like an intruder. She felt seen, not as Daniel's ex, not as the woman who didn't want kids, but as someone who'd chosen her path, changed it when her heart led her elsewhere, and showed up anyway, with love and no apologies. Daniel finally walked over, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped just a little. "I'm sorry," he said. The words rough but real. She looked up at him. "For what?" "For the email. For thinking I knew your story better than you did." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "We all make that mistake sometimes." He didn't ask how it happened, how she went from never to 4. He didn't need to. The answer was right there, breathing softly in the carriers. Wrapped in blankets she'd probably knit herself during sleepless nights. Instead, he crouched down and gently touched the hand of one of the awake babies. Her fingers curled around his thumb instantly, tiny and strong. He didn't say anything else. He just stayed there, holding that small hand, feeling the weight of his own assumptions dissolve in the warmth of her grip. The baby shower went on. Gifts were opened. Cake was cut. Photos were taken, some with Maya's belly, some with the quadruplets nestled together like a bouquet of new life. And when it was time to leave, the woman packed up her stroller with practiced efficiency. As she turned to go, Maya hugged her, briefly, warmly. "Thank you for coming," Maya said. The woman smiled. "Thank you for letting me." Then she walked out the same gate she'd entered, 4 babies in tow, sunlight catching the wheels of the stroller as it rolled down the driveway. No one spoke for a long moment after she left. Finally, someone said, "Well, that was something." And it was, 'cause sometimes the most powerful statements aren't shouted. They're whispered in the rustle of a blanket, the cry of a newborn, the quiet courage of showing up exactly as you are, even when the world expects you to be someone else. And in that backyard, on a sunny afternoon meant to celebrate one new life, 4 others had reminded everyone that joy doesn't follow a script. It writes its own. The days after the baby shower passed in a strange kind of quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, thoughtful kind that settles in after something shifts inside you, and you're not quite sure how to name it yet. Daniel moved through his routines like a man walking through fog. He made coffee in the morning, kissed Maya goodbye before work, answered emails, came home, ate dinner. Everything looked normal on the outside, but inside something had cracked open. He kept replaying the moment she walked in. Not just the stroller, not just the 4 babies, but the way she carried herself. No anger, no performance, just calm. Like she'd already made peace with everything, including him. And that was the part that haunted him the most. Because he hadn't. He'd been nursing a quiet resentment for years, dressing it up as disappointment, calling it closure when it was really just pride in disguise. One evening, after Maya had gone to bed, he sat alone in the living room, staring at the pile of baby gifts still stacked in the corner. A tiny pair of booties lay on top. He picked them up, turning them over in his hands. They were so small, so full of hope, and suddenly he felt ashamed. He thought about the email he'd sent. The smug little line, "I think you'd enjoy seeing what real joy looks like." At the time, it had felt clever. Now it just sounded cruel. Joy wasn't something you owned. It wasn't a trophy you held up to prove you'd won. It was something you lived, and sometimes it showed up in ways you never expected, in people you'd written off. He got up and walked to the window. The street was quiet, streetlights casting long shadows. He thought about her. How tired she must be, how overwhelmed, how miraculous it all was. 4 newborns, 4 mouths to feed, 4 cries in the night, 4 tiny lives depending on her. And still she'd come. Not to gloat, not to shame him, but maybe just to say without words, "I'm still here, and I'm okay." The next morning over breakfast, Maya finally broke the silence that had been growing between them. "You've been quiet," she said, stirring her tea. He looked up. "Yeah, just thinking." "About her?" He nodded. "I didn't mean for it to go like that." Maya set her cup down. "I know you didn't, but Daniel. Why did you invite her?" "Really?" He hesitated. He could have lied, could have said it was about closure, about being the bigger person, but the truth felt too heavy to carry alone anymore. "I wanted her to see what she gave up," he admitted, voice low. "I wanted her to feel, I don't know, regretful, like she missed out." Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "But she didn't miss out. She just chose a different path. And now she's on it, with 4 babies no less." "I know," he said, rubbing his temples. "And that's what kills me. I thought I was showing her what she lost, but really I was just showing her how small I've been." Maya reached across the table and took his hand. "You're not a bad person," she said gently. "You were hurt. That's real. But holding on to that hurt, it doesn't punish her. It punishes you." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not judgment but understanding, and maybe a little worry, because she was about to become a mother, and she didn't want her child's father to be someone who measured his worth by comparing his life to someone else's. Later that day, Daniel sat at his desk and opened a blank email. He stared at the screen for a long time. He deleted 3 drafts before finally writing something simple, raw, and true. "I owe you an apology. I invited you to the shower thinking I was proving something. To you, to myself, to everyone. But you showed up with grace I didn't deserve, and it made me see how wrong I've been. You didn't owe me anything, especially not your presence, but you came anyway. And instead of humility, I gave you arrogance, and I'm sorry for the email. I'm sorry for the years of thinking your choice was a rejection of me. It wasn't, it was just your truth. And now seeing you with your daughters, I hope you know how loved they are. How loved you are, and I don't expect a reply. I just needed you to know I see it now." He hit send before he could talk himself out of it. He didn't tell Maya. He didn't post about it. He just let it go, like dropping a stone into deep water and walking away. 2 days later, his phone buzzed with a new message. Not an email, a text. From a number he hadn't heard from in years. "Thank you for your message. I appreciate your honesty. And for what it's worth, I never thought your desire for children was wrong. I just knew it wasn't mine. That's all. I hope you become the kind of father your child deserves. One who leads with kindness, not comparison. Wishing you both all the best." He read it 3 times. Then he put his phone down and walked into the nursery they'd been painting together. Maya was taping off the trim, humming softly. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. The curve of her back, the way she bit her lip in concentration. "Hey," he said. She turned. "Hey." He walked over and took the paintbrush from her hand. "Let me help." She smiled just a little. "Okay." They worked in silence for a while, the only sound the soft scrape of brushes against wall. Then he said, "I wrote to her." Maya didn't look surprised. "And?" She said she hopes I become the kind of father my child deserves. Maya paused, then nodded. That's a good hope. It is, he said, and I'm going to try. That night, as they lay in bed, Maya resting her head on his chest, she said, You know, I used to wonder what she was like. The woman you were married to. I pictured someone cold, distant, and now? He asked. Now I think she's brave, Maya said softly. It takes courage to live your truth even when it changes. He didn't answer right away, but inside something settled. Not fixed, not perfect, but real. Meanwhile, across town, she sat on the floor of her living room, surrounded by baby blankets, bottles, and a mountain of laundry. One of the girls was napping in a bassinet nearby. Another was awake, staring at the ceiling fan with wide-eyed fascination. She reached down and gently brushed a curl from the baby's forehead. Her phone buzzed on the couch. She glanced at it, saw his name, and let it sit. She didn't need to reply right away. She'd already said what mattered. Her partner walked in, carrying 2 mugs of tea. How's it going? He asked, handing her one. Chaotic, she said, smiling. But good. He sat beside her, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. I heard about the shower. She raised an eyebrow. From who? Your sister. She called me after. Said it was intense. She laughed softly. It was. But not in the way I expected. He sipped his tea. You didn't have to go, you know. I know, she said. But I wanted to. Not for him, for me. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if I'd run from something I should have faced. He nodded. And now? Now I feel free, she said. Like I finally closed that chapter, not with anger, but with peace. He reached over and squeezed her hand. You're amazing, you know that? She shook her head. I'm just a person trying to do my best. Like everyone else. Later that evening, after all 4 girls were finally asleep, 2 in the crib, 2 in the bassinets, she sat by the window with her camera. She'd been documenting their first weeks, tiny yawns, sleepy stretches, the way their fingers curled around each other's hands even in sleep. She scrolled through the photos, her heart full in a way she never could have predicted. She thought about the life she'd built before. The quiet apartment, the solo trips, the freedom to say yes or no without considering anyone else. She didn't miss it exactly, but she didn't regret it either. That life had been honest. And this one was honest too, just louder, messier, and infinitely more tender. She didn't need Daniel's approval. She never had. But she was glad in a strange way that he'd seen her now, not as the woman who said no, but as the woman who said yes when her heart was ready. Back at his place, Daniel stood in the half-painted nursery, looking at the empty crib. In a few months it would hold a child. His child. And he wanted that child to grow up in a home where people weren't measured by their choices, but respected for their journeys. He picked up a stuffed elephant from the gift pile, the one from the shower, and placed it gently on the shelf. Then he turned off the light and closed the door softly behind him. No one had won that day at the baby shower. But maybe, just maybe, everyone had grown. Weeks passed, and the sharp edges of that baby shower day began to soften, like stones worn smooth by a river. Life didn't stop, it never does, but it moved forward with a new kind of awareness, like everyone involved had been gently shaken awake. Daniel didn't magically become a different person overnight. He still checked his phone too much. He still got impatient in traffic, but something had shifted beneath the surface. He started listening more, really listening, when Maya talked about her fears and hopes for motherhood. He stopped making jokes about people who change their minds or never knowing what you want. He even caught himself one afternoon, about to post a photo of the nursery with a caption like, "Finally building the family I always deserved," and deleted it before hitting share. That kind of language felt hollow now, even to him. Instead, he asked Maya how she was feeling, not just about the baby, but about everything. And when she admitted she'd been nervous about becoming a parent, scared she wouldn't be enough, he didn't rush to fix it. He just held her hand and said, "Me too." That honesty became their new rhythm. One evening, as they folded tiny clothes together, socks the size of walnuts, shirts with snaps instead of buttons, Maya said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently?" Daniel paused, holding a onesie with ducks on it. "Sometimes, but not in the way I used to." "How so?" "Before, I'd imagine her regretting her choice, wishing she'd stayed. Now, I just hope she's happy, truly happy." Not because I want her to see what she lost, but because I don't want her carrying guilt for something that was never wrong. Maya looked at him, her eyes soft. That's growth, he smiled faintly. Feels more like relief. Meanwhile, across town, life with 4 newborns was anything but quiet. Sleep came in stolen minutes. Showers were rare. Meals were eaten cold, if at all. But amid the chaos, there was a deep, steady current of love. The kind that doesn't need grand gestures. Just presence. She'd learned to nurse 2 babies at once, rock a third with her foot, and soothe the 4th with a lullaby hummed under her breath. Her partner had taken paternity leave and split nights with her, 2 on, 2 off, so neither drowned in exhaustion. They moved like a well-practiced team, communicating in glances and shorthand. She's gassy. This one needs a change. Can you grab the burp cloth? Oh. Friends dropped off meals. Her sister came twice a week to hold babies while she showered, or just sat in silence with a cup of tea. Neighbors left cookies on the porch with notes that said, "You've got this." It wasn't perfect. Some days she cried in the laundry room, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of responsibility. Other days she laughed until her ribs hurt when all 4 babies made the same surprised face at a sneeze. But through it all, she never once thought, I should have stayed child-free. And she never thought, I should have stayed with him. Both choices had been true for different times, different versions of herself. And that was okay. One afternoon, while the girls napped, she sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She hadn't touched her photography business in months. Not since the pregnancy got too big. Not since the delivery. Not since the world shrunk to feedings and diaper changes. But today she scrolled through old photos, street scenes, mountain sunsets, candid shots of strangers lost in thought. She missed it. Not enough to leave her babies, but enough to wonder if she could find a way to blend the 2 worlds. She started small. She set up a soft blanket by the window, bathed in morning light, and laid one of the girls on it. She snapped a few photos just for memory. But the light was perfect, the baby's expression peaceful, and something inside her lit up again. She posted one online that night with a simple caption. New subject. Same love for light. Within hours, messages poured in, not just from clients, but from other parents who said, "This is beautiful," or, "You captured exactly how I feel." One woman wrote, "I thought having kids meant giving up my art. Thank you for showing me it doesn't." She cried reading that. Not from sadness, but from connection. Back at Daniel's place, Maya went into labor 3 weeks early. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow build of contractions that turned urgent by midnight. Daniel drove her to the hospital with calm hands and a racing heart. He held her through each wave, whispered encouragement, fetched ice chips, and didn't flinch when things got messy. When their daughter was finally placed in Maya's arms, pink, squalling, perfect, Daniel didn't say a word. He just stared, tears streaming down his face as if seeing the world for the first time. Later, alone in the hallway while Maya slept, he pulled out his phone. He didn't text or call anyone. He just stood there looking at his daughter through the nursery window and felt the full weight of what it meant to be responsible for another human being, not as a trophy, not as proof, but as a sacred trust. He thought about the 4 girls across town, their tiny fingers, their identical yawns, the way their mother had carried them into that backyard with nothing but quiet strength. He hoped his daughter would grow up to be that kind of person, kind, grounded, unafraid to change her mind or follow her heart, even when it leads somewhere unexpected. The next morning, Maya's mother brought breakfast. As she cooed over the baby, she said, "You know, I always worried Daniel carried too much bitterness about his past. But seeing him with her, he's different now." Maya smiled. "He is. He's going to be a good dad. I think so too." At home again with their daughter sleeping in a bassinet beside the bed, Daniel sat up late one night feeding her a bottle. The house was silent except for the soft suck of her mouth and the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. In that stillness, he finally understood something he'd missed for years. Joy isn't something you win. It's something you receive and something you give. You don't earn it by proving you're better than someone else. You earn it by showing up humbly for the people in your life. A few days later, a small package arrived in the mail. No return address, just a plain brown box. Inside was a framed photograph. It showed 4 tiny hands stacked together, fingers interlaced, bathed in golden morning light. On the back, in neat handwriting, it read, "For your daughter. May she always know her worth isn't measured by anyone else's choices." Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he hung it on the wall of the nursery right above the crib. He didn't call. He didn't write back. He didn't need to. The message had been received. Life settled into its new patterns. Daniel took paternity leave. He learned to swaddle, to burp, to read the difference between a hungry cry and a tired one. He sent Maya back to the shower while he rocked their daughter, singing off-key lullabies that made the baby smile. Maya, in turn, started talking to him about her dreams again, not just for their child but for herself. She wanted to go back to work part-time. She wanted to take a pottery class. She wanted to travel when the baby was older, and Daniel didn't flinch. He said, "Let's figure it out together." Their relationship deepened not because everything was easy, but because they'd stopped keeping score. They weren't trying to prove they'd won at life. They were just trying to live it well. And across town, she began accepting small photography gigs again. Family sessions, newborn portraits, always with one of the girls strapped to her chest in a carrier or napping in a bassinet nearby. Clients didn't mind. Some even said her photos felt more alive now, more tender. She started a quiet Instagram page, not for fame but for other parents who felt torn between passion and parenthood. She posted honest captions, "Shot this between feedings. My hair's a mess but my heart's full." Or, "Yes, I said I never wanted kids. And yes, I love them more than I knew possible." People grow. That's allowed. No one argued. Most people just said, "Thank you for being real." One evening, as she rocked the last baby to sleep, her partner handed her a cup of chamomile tea. "You seem lighter," he said. She leaned into him, exhausted but content. "I am. I think I finally stopped apologizing for who I am." He kissed the top of her head. "Good, because I love exactly who you are." In the weeks that followed, neither Daniel nor she reached out again. There was no need. The chapter had closed, not with a bang, but with a quiet understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let go of the story you thought you were supposed to live, and in its place, build something new, messy, imperfect, and utterly human. Their paths wouldn't cross again in any grand way. No dramatic reunions, no shared holidays, no co-parenting of any kind, but they'd both been changed by that afternoon in the backyard, the man who learned humility, and the woman who proved that joy doesn't follow a script, and in the end, that was enough. Time has a way of smoothing out the sharp corners of life. What once felt like a crisis becomes a memory. What once seemed like a defining moment becomes just one page in a much longer story. Months after the baby shower, the one no one had expected to end the way it did, life settled into its own quiet rhythm for everyone involved. Daniel and Maya's daughter was now 3 months old. She had her mother's eyes and her father's laugh, the kind that bubbled up from deep in her chest and made everyone in the room smile. They'd named her Clara after Maya's grandmother, a woman known for her kindness and steady hands. Every evening, Daniel would hold Clara against his chest, walking slowly around the living room while she drifted off to sleep. He'd whisper things to her, silly songs, promises, hopes, that he never would have imagined saying a year ago. "You don't have to be perfect," he'd murmur. "You just have to be you." He'd stopped comparing, stopped measuring his life against anyone else's. Instead, he found joy in the small things. The way Clara gripped his finger when she woke up, the sound of Maya humming in the kitchen, the quiet pride of changing a diaper without spilling a drop. Fatherhood hadn't fixed him, it had softened him, and that, he realized, was more than enough. One Saturday morning, as sunlight streamed through the nursery window, Daniel stood in front of the wall where he'd hung the photograph, the one with the 4 tiny hands stacked together. He'd looked at it every day since it arrived, and every time it reminded him of something important, that people aren't static. They grow, they change, and sometimes, the very thing you think defines someone is just a chapter, not the whole book. He picked up a small frame from the dresser, Clara's first professional photo taken by a local newborn photographer. He placed it on the shelf beside the other one. 2 different families, 2 different paths, both full of love. Maya walked in holding a cup of coffee. She followed his gaze. "Still makes you think, huh?" He nodded. It's like a reminder that life doesn't go the way we plan. And that's okay, she smiled. Better than okay. It's beautiful. Later that week, they hosted a small gathering to celebrate Clara's 3-month milestone. Nothing fancy, just close friends, a few family members, and a cake shaped like a crescent moon. There were no games, no speeches, just warm conversation, and the soft coos of a baby passing from lap to lap. This time, there was no invitation sent out of spite. No hidden agenda, just an open door and open hearts. And though she wasn't there, her presence was felt. Not in a haunting way, but in the quiet shift in how Daniel moved through the world. He was gentler now, more patient, less sure of his own certainty. And Maya noticed. Everyone did. Across town, life with 4 babies had settled into a kind of organized chaos. The girls were starting to develop their own little personalities. One loved music, one hated socks, one smiled at everything, and one studied faces like she was solving a puzzle. Their mother had returned to photography in a real way now, not just as a hobby, but as part of who she was. She'd even started offering real-life newborn sessions. No perfect lighting, no posed props, just parents in their homes, tired and tender, holding their babies exactly as they were. Clients loved it. They said her photos felt honest, human. One afternoon, while editing a batch of images, she got a message from a magazine editor who'd seen her work online. They wanted to feature her in a piece about motherhood and creativity, how women navigate identity after becoming parents, especially when their journey defies expectations. She almost said no. She didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't want to be held up as proof that everyone changes their mind about kids. That wasn't the point. But then she thought about the messages she'd received, the ones from women who said, "I thought I was broken for not wanting children," or, "I was scared to admit I changed my mind." Maybe her story could help someone feel less alone. So she said yes. The interview was gentle. The writer didn't push for drama, didn't ask, "Do you regret saying you never wanted kids?" Instead, they asked, "What did you learn about yourself through this experience?" She answered simply, that I'm allowed to evolve, that my choices at 28 don't have to define me at 36, and that love doesn't follow a timeline. It shows up when you're ready to receive it. When the article came out, she didn't post it everywhere. She shared it once with a note. For anyone who's been told they're too late or too early or too inconsistent, you're just human. And that's more than enough. The response was overwhelming, not in numbers but in sincerity. Messages poured in from people of all ages, all walks of life, saying thank you for giving them permission to change. She never mentioned Daniel, never referenced the baby shower. That part of the story wasn't hers to tell anymore. It belonged to him now, to his growth, his humility, his journey toward becoming the father he wanted to be. And that was how it should be. Back at Daniel's home, Clara had her first laugh that week, a full-bodied, gurgling sound that made Maya cry happy tears. They recorded it and played it back 3 times, marveling at the miracle of it. That night, Daniel sat on the porch, Clara asleep in his arms, and looked up at the stars. He thought about how small his old grudges seemed now. How silly it was to think that someone else's life was a reflection of his worth. He'd spent so long waiting for her to regret her choice when, all along, the only person he needed to forgive was himself, for holding on so tightly to a version of happiness that wasn't even real. Inside, Maya was folding laundry, humming softly. The house smelled like baby shampoo and fresh bread. It wasn't perfect. There were still sleepless nights, messy floors, and moments of doubt, but it was theirs, and it was enough. A few weeks later, another small package arrived in the mail. This time it was a photo book. The cover read, 4 Little Miracles. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside were images of the girls, growing, smiling, reaching for each other's hands. There were shots of their mother holding them, exhausted but radiant, of their home, full of toys and love and laundry. On the last page, a note. May your daughter know her worth isn't measured by anyone else's choices. May she grow up knowing she is enough exactly as she is. Wishing you all peace, joy, and many quiet moments of wonder. He showed it to Maya that night. She ran her fingers over the photos, her eyes soft. She's happy, she said. She is, Daniel agreed. And I'm glad. He didn't feel jealousy. He didn't feel shame. He just felt grateful. Grateful that she'd shown up that day. Grateful that she'd refused to play the role he'd written for her. Grateful that she'd reminded him without saying a word that life is too big for petty scores. He placed the photo book on Clara's bookshelf, next to board books and stuffed animals. Not as a reminder of the past, but as a gift for the future. Something his daughter might look at one day and understand. That people are complex. That hearts can change and that kindness is always the right choice. Months turned into a year. Clara took her first steps. The quadruplets started crawling, then pulling themselves up on furniture, then toddling after each other like a tiny, giggling parade. Their mother began teaching photography workshops for new parents, showing them how to capture real moments without fancy gear, just love and attention. She never spoke publicly about the baby shower. When asked about her journey to motherhood, she kept it simple. I didn't plan for this. But when it came, I said yes with all my heart. And that was the truth. As for Daniel, he became the kind of father he'd hoped to be, not perfect, but present. He read to Clara every night. He danced with her in the kitchen. He apologized when he lost his temper. He let Maya have space to be herself, not just a mom. And slowly, quietly, he built a life rooted not in comparison, but in connection. One evening, as he tucked Clara into bed, she reached up and touched his cheek with her tiny hand. He kissed her fingers and whispered, "I love you more than all the stars." She smiled, already half asleep. And in that moment, he finally understood. Joy isn't something you win. It's something you welcome, something you nurture, something you share, without keeping score. The story didn't end with revenge or humiliation. It ended with growth, with grace, with 4 babies and 1 baby, all loved fiercely in their own ways. With 2 people who once thought they knew everything about each other and life, learning to let go and begin again. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending of all.